Okay, picking up right where we left off, we're going to use a combination of the Instantiate command and the prefab for the enemy that we created in the last video to create enemy formations. Saves lots of work, so you don't have to keep dragging and dropping and manually trying to create a formation. With just a couple lines of code, you can make a formation of, thousands of enemies or even an infinite amount, and with just a little more coding, you can make them be randomized. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on Game Object, click on Create Empty, and we're going to rename it GM, obviously short for Game Master. There's absolutely nothing special about this object. Calling it GM doesn't do anything magical to it. That's just for the benefit of you, the developer, knowing that that's what you're going to use it for. In fact, you can just slide it out of the camera view because it's not even going to be visible. This is a great way of creating like a repository for overall game flow, like to create, as we said, the enemy formations and maybe keeping track of score and other things like that. Maybe there's animations that have to be changed in the background and have to be synchronized. So the Game Master helps you put that all into one place. Now obviously there's certain functions that need to be attached to certain objects, like the player has a player script, the missile has a missile script, but as far as coordinating all those things together, you kind of want to put that into one place if appropriate, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to right click, choose Create, choose C# script, and we're going to call this GM Control. I'm going to click on the GM, going to drag and drop GM Control onto the GM, and then we're going to go ahead and open that up. Now we're going to use something that I haven't used yet, and that is a for loop. For loops, I'm going to paste it in just a second because it's easier to see than to explain, but basically what you do is you're creating a range. You're saying as long as a value is within a certain range, keep doing this. Now the difference between that and an if statement is an if statement simply checks to see if something is within a range, whereas a for statement automatically updates it. So I'm going to paste this in, but I'm going to explain everything. So first, let's actually create a variable for the enemy. Because as we said, the GM object's actually going to create the formation, so it needs to be aware of the enemy. So we click on GM, and there's the variable, and just drag and drop that. Now I did some testing in between videos, and what you're going to want to do is I decided that this thing just descended way too fast. So I turned the linear drag to 2, the gravity scale to 0.2. Having said that, at a certain point you're just going to have to trial and error to figure out for game balance what the right number should be, but that seemed to work pretty good. In fact, maybe a difficulty setting is that you change these within the code, as we said, within the GM script to make them faster as the game progresses, something like that. Okay, so now we're going to paste this in, and it goes into the start section, and like I said, there's only about 4 lines, actually only 3. So what you're having is a for loop within a for loop. So let's look at the inner one first. It says, so the integer y position is equal to 5, semicolon. If y position is less than 25, then increment by 3. And there's another semicolon there. So in other words, this starts at 5. As long as it's less than 25, keep increasing by 3. So it does that once, and then it performs everything in here. So instantiate the enemy object, new vector 2, at the x position, we haven't gotten to that yet, and the y position, which we just defined, with the enemy object's rotation. It does that, comes back to here. So y position was 5, increased it to 3, so it's 8. Is y position less than 25? Yes, it's 8. Increase it by 3 more. Runs this again with the new y position, on and on and on. So you're going through a range of numbers. Now, what makes it a little bit more complicated is this for statement is within a larger for statement. And this is where you have the x position. So if X position is, it starts as -5. If it's less than 3, which it is because it starts as -5, add 2 to it. That'll make it -3. And now you see where this comes in. So basically what you've got is this runs through -5, -3, -1, 1, 3, and then stops at 3. For each one of those, it does this entire cycle all over again. So this cycle only gets run once, but this cycle gets run for each and every time that this is run, because this is nested inside of this. So my apologies if it's a little bit messy. I'd rather have shown you just one for loop at a time rather than having two nested like this, but as you can see, just 3 lines, and watch what happens. See all the jellyfish? You have this massive formation, and all you had to do was write 3 lines of code. So much more efficient than trying to drag and drop each and every one of these. Now this won't last very long, but again, that's just 3 lines of code. And here's the thing, you can make this much bigger just by changing. You don't even have to add any more lines of code, you just have to change the range. So since the Y position is the vertical range, that's what we need. We need more rows of it. So rather than being less than 25, say less than 65. And now we'll run it again, and you'll see over on the side there's way more. See, now it goes down, you actually have a scroll bar, so there's so many more now. In fact, if you want, we can go over to the scene and zoom out, and you can see just how many were created. So that's powerful. So essentially, 3 lines of code, or I suppose you could argue 4 if you want to include that one, creates this massive formation of enemies, and it just scales so easy. As you saw, I changed one number. I changed this number, and it added so many more rows. So this is really the power of using instantiation and prefabs, that rather than having to drag and drop every single one of those enemies and manually lining them up, you've done it here. Now, true, it takes a few minutes to get this code right as far as where you want the things to be on the screen, but once you do, like I said, this is incredibly efficient coding. Now, because of this type of game, I'm not really concerned about performance, but you might want to put additional code as far as, okay, it doesn't do all these at first, it only does some of them, because we're in the start area. So maybe it only does some of these when you're in the start area, and in the update area it waits until you've gotten a little bit further to then instantiate the later ones. That way you don't have as many objects on the screen, but like I said, with a game like this, I can't imagine that being a problem. So that's it. That's it's that easy to create an enemy formation. So you've got a couple things in different places. You've got the you create the prefab first, and it has to have a rigid body, and it has the linear drag and the gravity scale to control that. You also have the fact that you then link it to a variable, and then you instantiate it, but still, you're talking a very, very easy process. So that's about it. If you have any questions about that, I think I'm going to do a separate video for the actual combat now.